Hello, everyone. Welcome to Deploy the Garrison Season 4, Episode 7. We are back again. I know you only just heard us, but we're here to entertain. We have Will Shick joining us today. How are you, Will?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be back in the garrison. So it's good to be here.
Yeah, we have the general rule, like you can be a guest a couple of times, but now you've been here that much, we're just going to do a normal show. So no special treatment.
Oh,
We're going to drag you along
so,
for our hobby experiences.
so I don't have to ask about getting drinks out of the fridge anymore. I just grab what I want. I love it. This is the best way to live.
Go for it.
Yeah, this is the best way to live. So,
and joining as always, my co-host Alan. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Pretty excited about all these changes. I did get a chance to try out a new teaching game. One of my buddies from SWU wanted to try Legion. We got a game in yesterday with a bunch of the new Empire stuff, and then I dug out some of my CIS to play against him, and yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, we had a bit.
These new cards are spicy.
Yeah, so we finished the last show with me saying that I thought the Imperial March was going to be enough to carry the Empire on its back to greatness. Can you confirm or deny, Alan? Not you, Will.
I would say, yeah, it's definitely strong. I could see where it's going to have some interesting impact, and we could get into that when I get into my officer's mess here.
Yeah,
but I don't want to bury the lead too much.
Well, we'll get right into the officer's mess then. And so, if you're not familiar with it, it's our chance to just chat about what we've been up to in the last normally 2 weeks. For me and Alan, it'll be 3 days. But yeah, Alan got another game. He's putting me to shame, so I've not managed to play in a couple of weeks now. But I have built I've finalized that Wookiee list. So I am just taking that 20 points I got back from Yoda and investing in improvised orders and then 3 strike and fades on my fluttercraft. So not huge changes for me, but it'll be fun to see if I can keep the fluttercraft alive a little bit longer.
More value. I mean, you got to love more value, right?
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's a really interesting card that I'm excited to get on the table. So that's literally my entire officer's mess. so have you managed to do anything, Alan? And then we'll leave with the 4 after that.
Sure. So as stated, I got that intro learning game with my buddy Josh. He wanted to play Empire, and he's like, I want to play Vader. I'm like, for your first go round, we're going to stay away from Vader. He's like, oh, okay, well, what other characters we got? I'm like, well, list them all off. And he landed on Krennic with Death Troopers and Boba Fett. So I gave him like a smorgasbord of Imperial units. So we ended up on 1 of each core except for a mortar with all the new toys. I did finish buying and building some riot squads like right before the announcement of all these points. I had bought one because it's like, oh, they're cool models and maybe they'll get to it eventually. And then literally a week later, it's like, hey, these things look real spicy now. And I immediately went back to the store the next day and bought a second one. So I'm excited for him. So I give him a little bit of everything. So 1 riot, 1 snow, 1 storm, and 1 shore, all with the popular heavy weapons, and then a smattering of these new upgrades. And yeah, that changes the way that a lot of these units play. It didn't affect in our case with riots because I charged my Magna Guard towards his Death Troopers. So his riots were able to just kind of come around the corner and immediately engage them. So they didn't need Imperial March, but like having that extra range for charge.
So Pagani was right. They've been good all along. It's fine.
Potentially, sure.
He will probably live on that hill forever. But hey, now everyone else can appreciate it too, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so hold the line. being still as it is, again, we listen to the other casts, and so there's talk about changing Hold the Line. I think Hold the Line just being, hey, you get both surges, it's pretty powerful. Because my Magnus coming in, finished getting down his Death Troopers. Then the Shore Troopers, the Riot Squad kill the Magna Guard, and then I had Kraken come in, and I'm like, no, I got nasty. I've got 5 red dice. I'm coming in. I'm gonna take out what's left of your guys. Yeah, I'm coming in to give you a beat down. I roll all 5 paint, and he rolls 3 blocks and a surge and takes 1 KX down. It's like, oh no. These guys do not go down easy. Like when you shoot at them, they will go down just like normal Stormtroopers. But when you get into melee with them, they are surprisingly tough. And now they're more efficient. You can fit more stuff with them.
Yeah.
Imperial March on the Snow Troopers, however, doing speed 1, speed 2, and then shooting. Oh boy, that was an experience. It gets around the cover, and more mobile Snow Troopers blew out a couple of my B1s, and then Boba jumps in, flames one squad, finishes off the other squad, and it's like, okay, we are losing bodies really quick. Let's see what we can do. But he had a good experience. Boba had some bad luck. He went down, and then it went back and forth. But I think both the lists I successfully made, reasonably on par with, someone who's experienced teaching someone new. We used the base game from the new Escalation League setup, where it's like a fixed, like for your recon level, you're doing intercept transmissions, surface scan, and then you both get cunning deployment. And that works really well for just the base game. It's like, we're not going to deal with any of the pick ban stuff. I mean, with recon, you don't have a pick ban. You just kind of flip it over and it's random. But having a fixed mission was really helpful for him. He had a good time. I had a good time. We rolled a lot of dice and had some laughs. So we got him. We got him. Hook, line, and sinker. He's he's in. He's going to go buy one of the other guys' Empire lists.
Perfect.
And everything like that, I think, is what he's looking at doing, and then grabbing one of the sets when it comes out.
Start to set soon.
Soon. We're gonna get them both. We're gonna get them both.
Yeah, then it gets easier, right? You got those pre-made starter lists. It'd be great.
Yep.
Yeah. You just grab 2 starters and have a game against each other. So it'll be pretty nice. And that leads, I guess, to my mess, which is that currently the office is looking to run a little Tale of 4 Gamers League thing, where everybody starts with stuff. And I've never done a Rebel army like the whole time with Legion. They're not particularly my bag. But they desperately needed somebody to do Rebels because nobody has a Rebel army currently. Plumber was the last one to do it when we did the Tale of 4 Gamers like 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I threw myself on the sacrificial pile. You know what? If it's part work, then I'll figure out a Rebel list that appeals to me and I will do it, and it will be a good time. I don't know what that Rebel list is. So my current mess is being like, I just, outside of some of the characters that I like, Rebel Troopers, Rebel Vets, what am I doing? I'll probably go Troopers just because the new hard plastics are so nice, and they're in the starter. So it'll probably just start with the starter box, and then I'll figure out where to go from there. We'll see how it goes. I got to figure out a paint scheme and all this other stuff. Like I got a lot of work ahead of me because of my bleeding heart, where they were like, Dallas was just sitting there being going, well, Ross really wants to do this thing, and I'm obviously going to do, I think he took droids this time. Dallas always gets first pick because he runs the whole thing. So, and usually whatever Dallas's pick is the one that I want. So I never get my first choice. I always have to settle for like second choice. But I was real late to this party. And so I got the last choice, which he started with, I know you're busy, so I'm not going to ask you to do this, but we have a problem. And I was like, okay, yeah, what's the problem? He's
All
like,
right.
I don't. Do you think there's anyone who would want to do a rebel army? Because we don't have anyone who wants to do rebels. And I was like, who have you asked? And he's like, well, I asked these people, and these other ones were like interested, but they're super busy because they're under deadlines. And you know how it is to like paint a whole army. It's kind of a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it's by the end of it, I was like, yeah, I'll do it. It's fine. So that will complete my circuit. I will have painted every faction and Legion by the time I finish. Rebels, because I did Empire in one of the Tales for 4 Gamers. I did a clone army just for funsies, and then I did my droids. Or I think they were done. They got shit off in the marketing thing. We used them for stream and stuff too.
Oh, nice.
So I've got them. I've got them all checked off. We used my Empire too in one of the streams way back when. They were the Huldra blue color. It turned out really snazzy. But I dodged the Rebel Alliance bullet multiple times now, and it finally caught me. So now I've got to be one of those scummy rebels and figure out what I'm gonna do. I think it's just like guerrilla fighters are not my bag that much. I don't know. I don't know what it is about me, because like I root for the rebels in the movies. I'm all about them. I'm like down with the Empire. Like, get rid of them. But when it comes to playing them in the game, I don't know. They have yet to inspire a spark in me that makes me go, oh, I have a really great idea. I'm excited to do this. So I'm going to have to figure that out. Maybe it'll be nothing but X-34s. I really like the X-34. To be honest, that's the one thing in Rebels that I'm like, if I could run an army of nothing but X-34s, I don't even care if it's good. I think it might be good now with Strike and Fade, but
I think we were talking about that as well. I think so.
We were.
I think I've always been on. I don't remember who I was talking to. I think it was at UK Games Expo during the tournament, but there was a list that was running 2 or 3 of them actually. And so I was talking with Ollie, who was doing he was judging the whole thing. And I was like, I'm pretty excited to see like some X-34s, because I've always thought since playtest that they had some legs, that they could be pretty good, but nobody really, they kind of flew under the radar. So either my assumption was wrong, or people just hadn't found them yet.
I think literally people not being able to find them had an effect for a while. Like I bought one the second I saw it on the shelf in Element Games when I landed in the UK, and I had no plan to do a Rebel army yet. But I hadn't seen in Canada. I hadn't seen one for 18 months. I mean, that's Canadian logistics as much as anything else. But I know
a little bit.
Some of my friends who had the old living card game FFG mentality of purchasing max slots of everything when it comes out, were running 2 and having success in the new game of it drives on, dies immediately because you just unload those unstable astromechs and just apply a lot of firepower to one part of the table and do some real good damage real quick.
It's got I think it has this really classic like Speed Freaks vibe, which really resonates with me, because I was always a very orky player. That kind of like crazy nonsense where you're just like, this totally shouldn't work, but it kind of works, because it's so unexpected and kind of so out of left field that people don't really have a plan for it, where you just, rush them with like garbage and it just works. To me, I can see that with the X-34s, right? Like I can just envision this bum rush of like all of these people and basically they're hoopties showing up on a field and being like, we got you, Empire. I like that. To me, that's fun. That's Rebel. That's fun.
Yeah. Showing up on their Toyota Technical. Just
exactly.
Coming in, doing their thing.
just screaming, witness me, it'll be fine.
Exactly. Shiny and chrome to the end, man. Shiny and chrome to the end. So that's kind of where I am on that. That's my mess. My mess is to figure out a compelling hobby project for Rebels that both will be fun to, paint and do all that, but then also will be one that I'll have a lot of fun playing, because I need it to do both.
I mean, I feel like it's some of the nicest models I've seen has been that X-34. Like people do some real nice work on them as well, so could be fun. Oh,
Sounds like you got a plan. You need 2 X-34s, and I would say if you're going Speed Freaks already, just throw a couple swoops in there and call it a day.
Yeah, I could go full Raiders. That could be interesting. Get the swoops in there. I'll have to play with it. I'll have to see how it works out. But I need that mounted Luke and Han. You know, if we're doing it, it's you got to get everybody to be fast. Everybody's got to be fast.
I mean, just delay when any like articles about it come out or
There
any
you go.
public facing photos, and just run them in. It's not like you don't know what we do.
They'll love that. They'll love that totally. So yeah.
Executive decision, guys. I'm just gonna run.
Right. Early samples will be in at some point, maybe before everything goes. I don't know. They didn't give a deadline for anything. I just agreed to it. So now I'm like in the planning phases. We'll find out.
There you go.
We'll find out when later. So.
All right.
Yeah.
So your comment of it's not your first pick because someone else always picks your first pick. If you did have your first pick of faction, what would it be? So now I'm curious.
Oh, this time around, if I had my first pick of faction this time around, I probably would have done Republic. Because
okay.
On the cycle, it's been so they were the first Legion kind of army that I put together and painted. So it's been a while. Like I haven't really come back to them. And now we've got like an Ahsoka and we've got some other cool things that are in the works that we haven't even talked about yet. So looking kind of ahead, I'm like, oh, I've got some cool ideas on what I would want to do there. And I could build to some of those upcoming releases a bit and do something very different. Because my initial clones, I did all like I did them all as wolf pack, so they've got the gray markings and things like that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and this time I think it would be really fun to do like a 212 with the new Obi-Wan, and we got Cody now, and I could do some like cool patterning with the saber tanks and some other stuff, like maybe throw an ISP in there. So that would be my first pick right now. Not necessarily because it would be good, but just because that's like it speaks to me.
Yeah. There you go.
I think my second pick would probably be Empire with Krennic and like Death Troopers and Shore Troopers.
You're on the right cast.
Run more of a because I think the Scarif stuff would be really fun to explore, because the last Empire army I did was like all dewbacks and normal Stormtroopers. Yeah. And so I've done the dewback thing, which is kind of my first. That's the first thing I think that is really cool in Empire is the dewbacks. So I did that army, and now I need something to do something different. And the Scarif, if I had to pick, like Scarif is the second Imperial thing that I think would be a really fun and cool hobby project. You could do beach bases and all of that stuff, and so I think that would be really cool. So that would have been my second pick. And then I think droids and rebels honestly were at the same level, because I just did the droids for my last army project. And so I kind of spent my idea. The only thing that I probably would have done this time is maybe leaned into a Genosian force and just done a lot of bugs. But I don't know if that would have stuck or not. Like, to be fair, I didn't do B1s in my last droid army. It was all B2s. There was like 2 min units of B1s, like just naked, no upgrades, no heavies, nothing. They were just there.
Technically present.
Yeah, technically present. Primarily for providing support to the 2 persuader tanks that I took in the force. So like it was a really weird and wild. I was just like, I'm going to build this crazy list out of the things that I think look cool, and we'll see how it does. And it did okay. It wasn't great. Now it'd probably be really good because B2s have definitely seen a bump in their stocks. But in Legacy Legion at the time, it was like, oh, that's a weird list. Most people don't play B2s that much, you know?
Right.
You don't make all of their core choices nothing but B2s. I was like, I'm doing it because B2s are awesome. I think B2s are great. I might have to revisit that list and add some Aqua droids just because I think they'd look cool in the color scheme. And
don't let Evan hear you say you're thinking about adding Aqua droids. He'll be like just on you complaining again.
I mean, you know, I've already stated my rule is typically cool first, and then I figure out how to make it viable in the game second. So I will always choose Dark Horse candidates if it's just neat. But yeah, like painting big chunky robots. I mean, that's the whole point of playing droids. So the bigger, chunkier robot, the better. And Aquas they're such cool looking designs.
Yeah.
I hear they're pretty good in the game though.
Yeah. Thanks for adding. It's probably if it was you, then extra thanks. Like adding the rule of we ignore the arms for height too, so you don't have the stupid like people gaming the system, putting the arms up. Haha, I block even higher now. It's like no, we're done with that nonsense. It stops at your head.
Yeah, that wasn't directly me. That was our fabulous devs. Especially after the discussion of like the AAT where the gun barrel can like point up and then point down. We had a discussion about how, I don't think anybody actually did it, but under the old rules in the game, you could on your turn put the barrel up so it was vertical, draw a line of sight from that, and then on your opponent's turn you could push the barrel down.
And now you can't see it.
You can't see it because that that was the loophole that existed. Nobody was terrible enough to utilize that loophole, thankfully, but it was by the rules very legal because there was no hard and fast like law about when could you move the movable parts that you made movable on your miniatures.
Sure,
because the game doesn't assume that this thing's going to matter, but by the letter of the law it does, because it's the highest point. So you could be like, I'm hiding, I'm not hiding, I'm hiding again.
Yeah.
So that was a big reason as to why we codified where you measure on the parts and how some of that stuff works.
I'll move us along onto our main topic, but I will just add in that I'm sure I heard 1,000 mercenary players cry out in pain and then suddenly be silenced to hear no Shadow Collective talk in any of that Tale of Four Gamers. Big sad.
It doesn't mean that somebody's not playing it. It's just they don't have a starter box. So I think that's
we're all
sorry. Like Battle Force, not a faction. I can't change that. It's doesn't mean you're not getting cool stuff. If I could have picked, this is true. If I could have picked, I probably would have done an all Weequay Shadow Collective like force and just done the Raiders, like just converted the swoop bikes to be Weequays, used the Wheelos, like because that'd be cool. That would be cool. That's inspiring.
That's my 2026 list right there.
But that was not an option that was provided to us. It was starter box start, because that's where we assume the vast majority of people will get their entry and move from there. So it's no bias. It's just like it's just how it was. Don't blame me. Oh. I don't write the mail. I just deliver it. All right.
Okay, so moving on to our main topic. Obviously, we gave our insights on the show that came out yesterday or earlier on the points reductions and then the upgrade cards, the universal upgrades that came out. So we're going to try and just have a little bit of a chat with you now and kind of go over those and have a few other questions. It's been 3 or 4 podcasts you've been on. We're going to try and not cover too much of the same ground as everybody else. So,
repetition's good. And who says that you won't get a different answer if you ask the same question?
True.
You never know.
All right. Well, then here's one. Which one's your favorite of these new upgrades?
Ooh, it's probably Strike Team Leader. It's because I think it is one of those. It's one of those upgrades that nails theme and thematics and hobby opportunity, and also addresses, I think, in a really solid gameplay fashion, some of the core issues that the operative slot specifically, but also just certain special forces units have. And so it's like it double dips, right? Like now all of a sudden, I've seen a lot of talk about, Padme's now kind of a good choice. You take her with Strike Team and you can take her with ARFs, and now ARFs are suddenly a more viable option because of the way in which they can generate tokens through that card and that kind of thing. And I think that not only is that super cool because you've elevated units that might be, struggling or have some deficiencies that were not necessarily intended to be that big or that impactful to a player's decision as to whether or not to take them in the army. But also, the hobbyist in me is like, now you get to make like Padme's personal guard of ARF troopers. That or like Callus's personal death trooper retinue, like these things that, or his, like, you can make ISB scouts that go along with, like scout troopers that are personally attached to Callus, so they have like ISB elements to them or whatever. They have a different color scheme. Those kinds of things are so cool, right? Like those are the things that get me to want to start a new army. It's not necessarily the gameplay or how these things will now synergize on the table. For me, being a longtime hobbyist, right? The core typically is like, oh, that would be so awesome to see. And with my hands, with my fingies, I can do it. Through the magic of hobby and miniatures and painting and all that stuff. And it may not look as good on when I'm done with it as it would be in my head, right? But like that's the journey of being an artist and being creative, is that you kind of never realize your ideal of what the thing is, but you still put it into reality. And Strike Team Leader is like one of those opportunities where, yeah, you can just combine the things from a game and army building perspective, but you can also take that thing and see it as hobby inspiration and come up with all of these amazing like combinations through your art and your creativity and these things that tell the story of Star Wars in the game through all this stuff. And those things, like those opportunities, they don't come along every time. When we hit them, I'm very excited, and it's like super extra cool that the community has really latched on to that and started to really explore the combinations that are made possible through it. And it's not just tripling down and making the best things better. It has been discussed as actually it makes these other things that have kind of been passed over much more, reasonable or willing to take, or considerations within our list building. And I think that's really cool. So that one's probably my favorite out of all of them for those reasons.
It's interesting. Padme goes down 8 points, and then there's this strike team upgrade that's 8 points.
Yeah, it's
weird.
It's almost like there's a delicate balance between point reductions and then giving people ways to spend those points that may not be necessarily on extra miniatures. Sometimes that is baked in, and there's definitely kind of a synergy between many of the points decreases and then obviously the new upgrades that went along with them, and a strong reason as to why those two things came out. In fact, they were so tied together that the first time you clicked on the points update link, you went to the upgrades link. So, like there you are, right? But it was one of those things where we were, approaching it and talking about doing it and discussing if we wanted to do the stealth update before November, which we felt really comfortable and confident about where we were with the points and also where we were with the upgrades. But the conversation was, if we release the upgrades without the points, it doesn't necessarily do everything we want. And if we release the points without the upgrades, it does positively affect units in that they are now cheaper, but those units still have some of the same problems that they have at their current points. And I think this is one of those things that, we took the assumption on, or took the belief in, when we were doing the last big round of looking at updates and looking at points and talking about where things and units sat within the factions and some of the struggles that we were seeing. And, the commentary on this unit is not very good because of X, Y, or Z, or this thing, is never taken in a list because it's terrible. And the community often would go to, well, it's just too expensive. But internally, the more we looked at it, we said, okay, but if you lower the points by 10, by 20, by 30, does it still do what it needs to do? Right? Like, at what point do the reductions make it viable if it's not performing the battlefield role, or if it doesn't have access to a token that it needs to really perform? Yes, lowering points gives you more opportunity to take things that can maybe provide that. So maybe that might be an upgrade if it exists, or it might be, a character, an operative, a commander, something that can give it or generate that token for it, depending on its faction and how those things work. But if it just can't count on that access, then does a steep points reduction make up for the fact that it just doesn't do what it was intended to do efficiently, in a way in which players believe it is worth its cost. So that's when we started really exploring the idea of universal upgrades as being ways in which we could add missing value or missing pieces to the puzzle to units that desperately needed it, right? And some of those things, especially in this update, right, with the 12 upgrades that came out, they're consistent across all units of that kind of type, right? Like operatives got hit really heavy in this one because we saw over and over that the operative slot was struggling to be competitive, and not competitive in a winning tournaments kind of way, being competitive in players actively looking at it as a viable slot and looking at the units within it as potential choices to build an army around or to include in armies. So we took a pretty aggressive approach on points reductions for the operatives. We took a pretty aggressive approach in designing and developing these upgrades that maximize or help operatives with the problems that we felt were the ones that consistently held that slot back, which is order control. And then obviously like creating these little mini groups with the strike team one that provided value to both, and ideally would boost other special forces units and create these combination potentials that would have players be able to expand their approach to the game and to breathe new life into things that maybe had been overlooked previously. Things like prepared positions was another one where we were like, we could just lower the points on all the prepared position units. That doesn't fundamentally change the fact that the common player complaint is they didn't like feeling so exposed, right? If prepared positions is
right,
fantastic because you get to go anywhere on the table and you kind of start into the fight faster, but it's terrible because your opponent knows exactly where that unit is and they can alpha strike it, right? Yep. So you are put into this challenging position, and that's across all prepared position units. So you can make it cheaper, which takes into account the fact that the value that we put on it within testing and everything else was not equal to the value players were putting on it. But even cheaper, they still have that core problem. So for players who are like, that's a deal breaker for me, I don't care how cheap it is, I'm not going to take a unit that I believe in my head, regardless of what the math says, because you can run the statistics all day, and we do, and be like, look, I know you think that unit's going to die before round one is over, but here's what it would take mathematically, statistically, for that unit to be completely obliterated to the point that it would be a waste of investment for you. And they would be like, I don't believe the math, right? I believe what I feel. Feelings are fundamentally the most important thing when you're playing games like this. So how do we create something that shifts that perception, that shifts that feeling, and makes the unit reclaim some of its cost that we subtracted, right? Like we took away some points, but now you can fix the problem of the unit potentially by adding points to it through dug in. Yeah. And again, so it's a lot of synergy. It's a lot of looking at things and saying, okay, points alone don't do it. And I think that is, or they don't always do it, right? Sometimes a point reduction can be fine. But I think we had the opportunity to really showcase some of our new design direction on how upgrades function, what upgrades could mean to the game, how universal upgrades would be taken in terms of their impact on players' list building and the units that could take them. And then also to kind of really dive in and not just band-aid over issues by reducing points, but leaving core fundamental issues that were holding these units back. Try to directly address those issues that we were seeing repeated across the entire game. And was it a big swing? I mean, maybe, right? Like we felt pretty confident where we were. Time will tell how all that shakes out, but that was kind of the mentality of it, is that we knew points alone, while exciting to the players and they would cause some stir, probably weren't going to really change the play patterns of players over the course of like a month, 6 weeks. Like how long do you get out of a points adjustment before you go, it could be 5 more points cheaper because it still has the same problems, right? It's like, you jump to the battery, but the battery is still bad. The car's not going to start the next time you get in it, right? It's
right. Because the alternator's busted.
We you touched on it on the Scoundrels cast, and obviously I feel like we've spoken about it before in historically of that, like something is always the most efficient, and like the best advice I've ever been given was building I think it was a 3rd or 4th edition Warhammer 40,000 army. It was a Howling Banshee themed King's Court. And the advice I was given was to take Striking Scorpions because they kill 0.3 more Space Marines.
Mm-hmm.
So in my Howling Banshee themed army, I should take Striking Scorpions instead of Howling Banshees, was the advice I was given. So at some point, that efficiency is always, it becomes the correct choice, but it doesn't matter anymore, right? And that's what that point change does. Something's always going to float to the top, and that's what you were saying on Scoundrels. If you wanted to expand on that.
Sure. I mean, I think like at the end of the day, right? If I recall correctly, it was kind of in relation to the discussion about how CIS feels very faction internally balanced.
Yeah.
Like it feels like everything within in Evan's opinion, maybe Mike's too, but I think Evan was the one who was talking about it.
Yeah, that's correct.
That CIS as a faction felt like everything in it was viable. And my comment was, well, wait like 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Or 6 weeks or whatever. And the reason
Sure.
that I say that is because if you are a player who only values the most efficient option, right? You are, because we all approach these games differently, right? Like I've already explained that I don't necessarily look at efficiency in terms of gameplay or power. I'm looking for narrative and hobby inspiration and things that I think are fun to play on the table, whether they are good or not within the meta. Like I want my experience as a player to be fun and to have a good time. And that is a very personal and subjective thing that I do, right? The way in which I approach these games is not the way in which Pagani approaches these games, which is he is looking more at efficiencies. He still enjoys the hobby and he will try to find like, I imagine with your Howling Banshee court list, it was like, okay, I'm gonna make sure that this is the best version of this army it can be.
Yeah.
But I'm okay not taking the slightly more efficient option because I have my story. That's a very Pagani approach. And then what he will do is he will put in the reps, right? His joy, his fun in these games comes from grinding out game after game after game until he is better with a less efficient option than the player who hasn't put in the reps with the most efficient option. That's his joy. And he's done it throughout his entire like player career, and it's something that he continues to bring. And I think this is part of why he's one of those folks who like he continued to bring up Riot Troopers as not being as bad as people felt they were, because I guarantee you, if he was a part of the Legion community and not a developer, you would have seen him at Worlds with a list built around Riot Troopers that he had practiced the hell out of, and he would have done fairly well. Like, would he have won? I don't know. Right? There's a lot of factors that go into it. Like that's his joy. His joy is finding the thing that the meta has abandoned, and then through player skill and some clever like synergies and list building, making it the best it can be, like making it better than the best option.
Yeah.
And then you have Dallas, who like could care less about the rules. In fact, he may not even know the rules exist half the time. He's just like, I'm going to convert all of this stuff because I have this vision, and he's going to make this beautiful like piece of art with his army. And you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And he's going to be like, yeah, I think it's probably play legal, but I don't know. And it's so beautiful that you're like, I don't even care, man. Let's just play a game. Right. So there's all these different people, but if you are one of those people whose joy comes from finding the most efficient option, right? From doing the data crunching and saying, this thing is 0.2% better than this thing. That 0.2% is all you need to know. So, at the end of the day, I think my point to that response was our job as developers and designers, and the way in which we have the philosophy around these games, is that not that we're trying to make everything equal. We're not trying to make everything balanced. But we're trying to ensure that everything is close enough in balance that it's all a viable choice. So that every player, regardless of how they approach the game, whether you're a me, a Pagani, a hard number cruncher, or a Dallas, can come to the game and never feel like when they make a choice, they have made the absolute wrong choice, right? So the fact that they feel like CIS, everything is viable, I think that's great. Is the faction balance like balanced? Is it perfectly balanced? No, because that doesn't exist. if you really get into the weeds on it, you're going to find out that certain things aren't, right? And we're already kind of seeing it with, I just saw a comment on one of the discords or some of the groups or something where it was like, why would I ever take an AAT when I can take 2 units of aqua droids and it's slightly cheaper? And like the math just tells me it's better, right? I don't know how well they did the math, but that's how they're approaching the game. It's not, I like the AAT over the aqua droids or I like the aqua droids over the AAT. It's, my statement is based on what I believe is the ultimate efficiency for the picks that I'm making. And that's just going to exist in any game that has different numbers. So again, I think what our goal is we just accept the fact that the game will never be perfectly balanced. There is no moment in the game's lifespan at which you will look at a faction at whole, or even a group of 2 core choices next to each other and be like, these are perfectly balanced against each other. It just won't be. Right? The balance will be close enough that all of the other factors that go into the game, ice luck, player skill, terrain setup, mission selection, the way in which the weather is in San Francisco Bay Area on a Tuesday, like those small things will have some effect. And the effect that they have will kind of smooth over the idea that there is a 0.05% difference in mathematical efficiency between what you're playing or I'm playing, or even a 5% difference, right? Like go even bigger, 5%, 10%. Like what's that number? Again, it's kind of a gut feeling. It's a take of, and that's why you rep a lot of games when you play test. That's the whole reason that we can't just have a spreadsheet that we plug in numbers. And we do have this spreadsheet, by the way. The spreadsheet is very biased against Stormtroopers. Sorry, Empire players, but Stormtroopers are the de facto. How many of them can I kill? Because that's how the stats sheet works. It was built by Ben. It was built by Ben Ransom. He likes to joke that we killed over 1 billion Stormtroopers in testing all of the new Legion stuff because he ran the chart that many times and he kept track of how many Stormtroopers, I guess, got murdered by the chart. But you can do that. You can just say, by the raw numbers, this is the way it works.
Yeah.
And then you can see that just doesn't, once you put it on the table and you start actually playing games, players will tell you this unit is terrible. And you'll be, mathematically, this is the best unit that we've ever made. In fact, mathematically, this unit might be a problem. And they'll be like, no, it's terrible. Like, I will never take it. It feels bad or it doesn't do what I want, because the actual variables of play matter almost more than the math itself.
It's almost like you've looked underneath the hood of like the article backlog I have of like, I've got all of the formula to work out efficiency of this unit by what dice does it have here, what surges and what keywords, and then it's like, but it just takes the interesting parts out of the game if you try and funnel it into that.
Yeah, it can. I mean, the reality of the situation is that even if you find the fun, like that's where your fun is, which I think is a perfectly fine way to approach these games, it's still not going to necessarily lead to results that I think you're going to enjoy, right? Because there are some other ways and variables in the way in which it works. And that's even before you start talking about the idea that we're making a game about Star Wars.
Yeah.
Right. That the reason that a vast majority of us came to this game and have invested our time, energy, and passion into it is not because it's the best miniatures game rule set that's ever existed. It might be part of why you stayed, because it was a great rule system. But the reason you picked up the box was because you're like, oh damn, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, this is dope. I love these guys, and I get to use these. I get to use them, and they're little, and they and like maybe you knew miniatures, maybe you didn't. I don't know what your journey was, but the reality is that the first thing that grabbed you was Star Wars. It was the fantasy of being able to play in a galaxy far, far away and see an expression of that narrative on the tabletop that you were in control of, from how it looked to how your armies formed to how you engage in battle to how that battle unfolds between the actions and the interactions between you and your opponent, to the stories that you tell afterwards, right? The things you take away from that game. It is us in Star Wars. And so if you can't express, certain characters cannot be expressed just through pure mathematical expression, right? Like Darth Vader has to feel like Darth Vader. Han Solo has to feel like Han Solo. And these are flawed individuals who make mistakes and fail as well as they succeed within the story limits. And they do certain things that, statistically, if you want a perfectly balanced and ideal warrior for your war game, that they're not it, right? They're just not it. So they kind of fundamentally have these flaws, right? Vader is slow. He's in this life support suit and he's not particularly speedy anymore. So he gets speed 1. Does that, there's ways to make up for that deficiency and balance around that between his like offensive power and all these other different attributes. But the reality is like, he's slow. He's got detriments. Those detriments are different from Han Solo's detriments. They're different from Cody's detriments. They're different from all these different, like, they're different from an ARF trooper unit to a store, like, right? That's what makes the game feel interesting and alive and feel like Star Wars, is that if we're doing our job as developers and designers right, we are accurately representing these things from Star Wars on the tabletop through the rules. And in order to do that, we know that those things in the story are not balanced against each other. That's not how the story works. Right now, the narrative controls a lot of like when a character's power goes up and when it goes down based on if they want tension or not, or how close they are to the end of the story. But miniatures games kind of function in the same way if they're going to tell good narratives and if they're going to be good reflections of whatever the IP is that they're showing, right? To borrow the 40K thing, it's like, why are Space Marines invincible in the novels and yet they die in droves on the tabletop? It's because one makes a great story, one makes a good game, right? So you kind of have to pick and choose where those things lie out. And it's just another layer on top of the complicated like dance that we do when we're making these games and talking about these things and talking about balance and how do we get these things to feel right. It's not just make the math accurate or make the play experience accurate. It's also do all that, but make sure that Star Wars is expressed and felt on the table, because I think even if we had the best balanced game and a super solid rule set, if it didn't feel like Star Wars, I don't think the game would be very successful, right? Like because I think a lot of us are here and we stay because we love being in that galaxy. We love these characters. We love being able to be a part of it. And so that, that is our guiding light always internally whenever we're doing stuff, is, are we being true to the IP, to the Star Wars characters? When we put a character on the table, does it feel like that character? When we put a unit on the table, does it feel like that unit? And if it doesn't, we may make it better or we may make it worse, right? We might tune it down because we're just like, this, Commander Luke, he doesn't have it all together. He's still figuring it out, right? He's prone to a lot of failures. And that's really all episode 5 is about. He fails at literally everything he tries.
Jacket, though.
He does have, now he has a cool yellow jacket. Yeah. So he's the Luke that's part of the Marvel run in between 4 and 5, as opposed to the old version, which was more of like the Dagobah Cloud City dual Luke.
Yeah.
So, maybe he's a little more like gung ho, a little less like sallow. He hasn't been quite as beaten down as previous Commander Luke, maybe. So
yeah, we've got him dashing hero forward for Rebellion now. It's great.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's got a more like boyish glint in his eye, I like to think. You look at the original Legion art for him, and there was a bit more like wariness to him. He had been nearly eaten by a wampa. He had met what he thought was going to be a great warrior who told him that warriors weren't so great, and that all of his dreams were kind of dumb, and he wasn't thinking about it properly.
He had to
went into
up.
a cave. Yeah, he should grow up. He went into a cave and cut off his own head, and that was confusing.
Yep.
And then he left against all advice from both his mentor and his new mentor. The yellow jacket Luke, like he blew up the Death Star. He gets free drinks at all the rebel bars. People love him. Everyone will follow him into battle. Like, this is still the best time of his life. He doesn't mind that he never made it to the Tashi power station. Let's be honest.
Doesn't even think about Uncle and
he's forgotten about it. Yeah, he's forgotten about the Tashi power station. Like, that's just long gone. He's like, I'm off to bigger and better things, boys. Yeah, bigger and better things, boys.
Freshman frat boy Luke. He's more on the Han side than the Obi-Wan side at this point.
Oh, for sure. Han and him, the reason they're close is because of his yellow jacket phase. There's no question.
So
All right, I've
looking
taken us
forward to
completely
playing
off
that.
track. So
No, not at all. I deliberately actually wanted to give you more time on this appearance, and that's why I wanted to invite you into the officer's mess properly and stuff to let you actually get some of that across, because I feel like when it's interview, and we're talking points come up, you know what I mean, and it can get very not repetitive. As you said, you get those more in depth. There's a little nuance here that you might not pick up from the first time you answer a question, but just getting to get that feel of how you all think about the game and Star Wars and show that obvious passion. That was great. Like there's no on or off topic today. This is exactly where we are. That said, I will let Alan ask you
question,
about,
please.
I will let Alan ask you about the Imperial Lat, though.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Imperial Lat, super exciting. We get some door gunners. That's really cool. I'm a little stung personally as the Empire player. It's like, yeah, Lat got 10 points down. Oh wait, it's just Republic only.
It's just the Republic.
Yeah. Why don't I get 10 points off my Lat? I want a cheaper Lat. Now I have my thoughts of why. There's probably infinite numbers of good reason why it shouldn't come down anymore, but I want to hear yours.
Oh, yeah. So I can give you kind of the overview of the development reason as to why. Like, I believe the ATRT for Republic didn't go up or down.
Right.
So it didn't change. Yeah, just the blaster, which equalized across the different factions. But obviously, the Rebel ATRT went up. So there are certainly cross-faction units that didn't see a priority in the points adjustment. The first answer is that, and this is the cop-out answer, which is we didn't feel it needed an adjustment based on its performance and review and play testing and everything else. It performed, in our eyes, it performed better, or at least to standard, than the Republic one, which was often and more often overlooked.
Sure.
And, is that accurate? Is it not? I think there's the element of not being able to token share in the Republic, which is something that you always have to be first and foremost thinking about if you want to maximize your units and your advantages and stuff, is a big one. The pilot upgrades in Empire definitely have some effect on its efficiencies as well. Like between the pilot upgrades, they kind of can do different things, and the Empire one just kind of does more. For what it does. And then of course, what is the role that it fits within its faction itself, right? And the Republic one, I think, was struggling a bit to find a place for a lot of different factors, which led us to believe that a points decrease was probably warranted. When you looked again at that pesky internal faction balance that I just talked about, we'll never get. But again, our guiding light is to try to make sure that every option or unit within a faction is a considered choice, right? That at least, at the very least, a player, when they're like making their army, doesn't immediately skip over something with no thought. They're just like, nope, I absolutely know that there's no reason to take this thing. That's bad. We want you to at least say, do I want this? Nah, or yes. And that could be based on a variety of factors: playstyle, army composition, points value, efficiency, whatever. But at the very least, you should feel like everything is worth consideration, at least initial consideration. And then ideally, there will be some hard choices that you have to make as you build your army. And that's another big tenet of how we try to look at this stuff, is that you shouldn't be able to do everything you want with the points allotted to you. You should be in a situation where it's like, oh, I really want these 5 things, but I can only afford 3 of them. Right. Maybe if I remove this, I can afford 4 of them, but do I want to lose that? Right. Because that's the joy of army building, is making those decisions and expressing your sensibilities and skill as a player through those items. So the Republic one, we looked at that, and all of the data said that it probably should see a decrease. Whereas the Imperial one, it just, like, we're like, yeah, a points decrease is always nice. Everything, like, if something gets cheaper, it's great, right? But
green down across the board.
Green down, like, yeah, that's just stocks go up when green arrows point down. But the reality is it's like it wasn't a necessary or even a healthy decrease at the time, right? Will we maybe see that change? I don't know. It's possible, anything's possible, but the door gunners we felt already gave it a pretty strong lift, along with some of the pilots and things like that, and what it did within the faction itself.
Yeah.
So we chose not to do it. And
looking at the listeners, it should not go down because we just got a buff to our riot squads, and they can go in there and be delivered at speed 3.
Yes.
Like, no.
Yes.
Stop whining. We got a lot of good stuff.
There are some potential synergies that are pretty strong with all of that as well.
I'm going to be digging mine out and finishing painting them.
But yeah, so I think and by similar reasoning, right? Why did the Rebel ATRT go up and the Republic one remain untouched? It's because the value that those things add between the factions is very different.
Yeah.
Right.
And the Rebel ATRT, what it was bringing to the faction, how it was being utilized in the list, what it was doing within its organizational chart section, compared to the other options, it had an outsized impact. It was clearly worth more than what it was, based on the new way the players were engaging and doing all that stuff. Whereas the clone one, well, it does, surprisingly, it does a lot of the same shtick that the Rebel one was doing with a better save. The actual like gameplay, again, seeing it on the table, it actually offers less value because the army doesn't need what it does as badly as what the rebels do, right? So from a faction internal balance and what the faction is doing, the exact same unit, more or less, can have a dramatically different impact
based on what's around it.
On what's around it, how the army wants to function, how the core units, how their survivability, these types of different things, right? So that's kind of like the flip side to say that this is part of the thing that you're looking at. It's also one of those things that makes Wookiees so interesting because they're in 3 different places because they have the Battle Force, they have the generic Republic ones, and they have the Rebel ones. And there's that reality where, like, if you're not careful and you push Wookiees within Republic too far, the Battle Force just becomes real good, like overly good. And then of course you have the other, like, what are they bringing to each faction? How are they functioning within it and stuff like that? So that is something that those cross faction units always are being watched for is, okay, they functionally do the same thing, but this stuff, the weapons all got standardized because the laser cannon was just obviously the best choice. I mean, you didn't really have to think about it to be like, no, this is great. The dice pool's awesome. Its effects are awesome. And it's the cheapest one.
Yeah.
And again, what we wanted was players to actually have meaningful choice between the 3 based on the battlefield role that they wanted it to have. So by flattening all of them to 15, we really felt like with the testing that we had and conversations with the playtesters and stuff that we nailed it. So that was why they changed across both the factions, whereas the unit itself only saw points changes in Rebels rather than Republic.
Seems to make sense. I appreciate like you guys being willing to do that because that was something back in my day, back in the FFG days where they were like, no, they have to stay the same price. They're the same unit. They are the same price against both factions, and it caused some of those problems where it's just like, yeah, it's worth it over here and it's not worth it over here. And part of that is it was kind of worth it in Empire and it wasn't worth it in GAR. And then a lot of the player base has that same baggage that's been carried over, even in new Legion that, Republic Lat has just never been good. It's not worth looking at. It's like, well, now there's a 10 point. Maybe we should go back and look at it again, things like that. So
for sure.
There's a lot of those preconceptions to break down, right? We all have all of us existing players anyway. You're going to find once these starters come out, 6 to 10 months down the line of hooking in those new players with these new starter sets, someone who's coming blind to just this is the only experience of Legion. All of those like internal matters you guys spoke about from like your original costings of prepared positions and stuff like that could all come to the fore because they're playing a meta that we just don't see yet because of those things that we brought to the table from all of that baggage Alan's talking about.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, and I think that there's, we talked about this a little bit on one of the discussions that I don't remember now because we've had so many great talks on so many different parts. But like,
so many.
I do feel like, just with the way in which the rollout kind of happened, and there was no clean, the game is totally new, and there's a whole bunch of new people coming in, that we missed out a little bit within the community so far. And maybe like you're talking about here, Kris, when new players come in who have no preconceived notions about the game, we might see more crazy exploration. But the idea that, we dropped all this new stuff in July, there were new missions, there were updated unit cards, there was all this stuff, but there wasn't like also a new group of influx of people coming in, right? It was so the same kind of thought processes and applications you didn't see typically in those big edition changes. The world is your oyster. You can try anything until the meta shakes out, right? And it's all new and different. There was like a small moment of like, oh, it's a brand new world. We can do anything we want. But very quickly, the meta kind of shook out, and people were just like, nah, I'm just going to stick with what I used to do, and I'll force the square peg to fit in the round hole. And sometimes that was okay, and sometimes it wasn't. And then a lot of the times, I think there was just this lack of exploration that maybe we'll see again. And I think the community has slowly done it, but it's been interesting to kind of watch the difference between how edition changes typically happen with a lot of innovation, a lot of weirdness, and then the meta slowly shakes out over the course of several months after, versus here where I feel like there was a buzz and then it was, oh no, we can just make the old rules apply. And now very slowly and organically, we've seen players start to tweak as some people have come in with lists like dark horse lists and things like that. But there wasn't this moment of like deep dive exploration where all the rules were gone. And it'll be interesting to see how, new players influence that, how those things work. Obviously, there's also the challenge or the challenge /
opportunity.
I don't know if it's an opportunity, but the reality that as those new players come in, right, we're also doing this huge work on updating all the products to multilingual. We're reissuing things. A lot of the soft plastic has disappeared and will be coming back as hard plastic over the course of time. That means that in some ways, the game is launching fresh like it did in 2018, right? To the fact that new players will not have access necessarily right away to everything a veteran has. So will that breed more creativity when they say, oh, well, everyone tells me in Empire I have to take Death Troopers, but I can't find Death Troopers for another 7 months. I know they're coming because they're on the reissue schedule, and we've published that, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that those products and those units get into players' hands as fast as possible, because we understand that new players will want to be able to have all the choices, but there's still going to be a little gap. So does that new player then go, all right, what else do I have? Like, do I find a way to make this other unit that's been overshadowed fill the slot? And what creativity comes out of the limitations from that? And I think that's another thing that'll be really interesting and intriguing to watch as, the meta is challenged not just by players innovating with all the options, but players innovating through necessity and saying, well, I can't get this, but I do have this. How do I make this work until I can get that? And will that be successful? Will it not? I don't know. That again is just the reality of the product production cycle and how this, overall like revamp had to work. Because as we've discussed, one of the big considerations was you never want retailers to feel like they got burned with product that they can't sell, right? That's the fastest way to make sure a retailer will never carry your line again.
Yeah.
It's to be like, hey, that huge investment you made? Well, the boxes look old and busted. It doesn't matter how many times we tell people that the product, like the stuff in them, the units and everything else are fine, right? Print off the new cards, they're free, or we give a stack of new cards for retailers to hand out as people pick up those products that are on the shelf. If the new shiny box is right next to the old box, the player's going to go, well, the new one's just better. We're just trained as, capitalist beings to say the new one must be better because it's shiny.
Sure.
Right. And so, living through that several times and having those conversations and wanting to be as pro retailer as possible, because we know that our success is built off of that foundation, right? The local game store is the beating heart of every miniatures game community. It doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter what digital assets come out. It doesn't matter how many 3D printers you have in your garage or whatever. Like without the community center, without the game club, if you're in Europe, right? Because I don't want to discount that. That is effectively the LGS of our friends and brothers and sisters across the pond. Or if you're in the States and several of the other like Western Hemisphere countries, the LGS, you're not going to see the kind of like community and global growth and excitement and all of that stuff you see from the biggest games. They're all based off of that store. So you better make sure that you're providing as much value and taking care of those people who are literally the beating heart of the games and the game experience you're trying to give people. So with that, right, we were committed to making sure that we burned all of that old stock and gave people the time to make sure that it was all gone. Yeah, that was going to cause pain to folks, both veterans who wanted to buy into the game. It was going to kind of slow down our acquisition for a little while because new players didn't have anything necessarily to buy. They had to wait for the other stuff.
Yep.
And it will mean that new players coming in will have a real first game experience where you're going to just get things as even old releases will feel like new releases to them because they're going to come out at a cadence and it's not all going to be on the shelf. I think positively that means that those players aren't going to be overwhelmed with choice, right? They're going to have a roadmap that says, cool, I can get my starter done. I can finish that loop. I want more stuff. What's available this month? Awesome. I'm going to get that stuff, right? They're going to have the same experience we had as new players. Because I imagine if you're listening to this, you're a vet. If you're a new player, welcome. Very exciting. I'm excited for your journey that I'm explaining here. I don't want to discriminate, but those were the choices that we made because we said, okay, we can uphold our value and our belief and our statements that we have internally to the retailers and ensure that stock is as gone from the channels as possible. And I know it's still out there because, if you search anywhere, you can find somebody who has it, but it's mostly gone. And the community had kind of like mimics that by saying, I can't find this, I can't find that. Perfect. Yeah. So now we have this virgin field where like ideally retailers, as they bring it in and they get new acquisition, all this stuff, they're going to see that turn off the shelf, and that turn is going to be an indicator of success. And that's going to make them want to invest more into the community, which is going to help us grow as a group, as Legion players, as everything else across the globe. And we're going to have many more players to play against. And isn't that always the dream, right? To have more opponents on game night that 100%. You can play against. So I don't remember what the question was, but there you go. I don't.
Oh, that's good.
It's a good answer.
Yeah, it's like 2 a.m. I feel like it's 2 a.m. for me, not Kris, because like I'm clearly drunk off of like tiredness or something. I'm just going,
Yeah. I do have 2 questions that we've kind of not got to, so I'll try and rapid fire, and I'll rein you in a little bit more if we need to, just so we can get you away. I appreciate your time.
I mean, I know you just want to go to bed. I've got another like 7 hours before it's 1 a.m. for me.
So this one's probably going to be a shorter answer for you, which is really easy to do.
Oh, challenge accepted, sir.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
oh boy,
feel free. But the transmission spoke about the marksman upgrade for both riot control and sweeper cell, and obviously more will come later, kind of thing. So obviously, I'm not expecting a giant spoiler and like, oh, this is what we're doing. But like, can you talk more on the reasonings? Is it just like that thing you said about making it 0 points doesn't fix it kind of thing?
Sort of. I think the challenge we have with those 2 units is that sometimes you have a really cool idea in game development or design, and you're like, this is really neat. This is such a cool way to do stuff. And then you implement that. And you kind of realize that, yeah, the idea is sound, but the value of it in the actual game is really finicky. So lowering the points on those is absolutely not okay. Because once you can spam enough of them,
causes problems.
They become exceptionally oppressive, right? And then But we also know that where they're sitting currently at their points value, they are just not worth taking. Like players, they're an option. Again, we're going back to the what's a big no-no? A player looking at an option and just being like, bah, right? And if that's a, if that's a grenade or some kind of like comms item that isn't a miniature, whatever. We'll accept the fact that not all cards have to have equal value. It's great if they do, right? We want to have compelling options when you're upgrading things. I think this goes back to some of the stuff we talked about in terms of the, our design approach about having upgrades that do compelling things that ideally we're utilizing that card space we earned back from not having art and having more flexibility with being able to write rules that aren't just this unit gains X keyword because we're on a half size card with, a very limited text box and we still have to worry about translations and things like that. So now we can write, effectively upgrade sized universal rules that aren't universal rules or keywords and that kind of stuff. But that card is challenging because, again, as a miniature, we want it to be a very compelling choice. Like you're putting your hobby time and investment into building, painting, all of that stuff. So it needs to have value to players. It should be something that you're thinking about. Do I want this? Do I not? We're obviously not there. The problem that we really ran into, again, I talked about on all of these, right? We talked about how we felt very comfortable and confident in what we released and that this was good for the game. It is balanced as we could make it, and it was going to move the game forward in a positive fashion. Those marksman cards, yeah, I mean, we're still kind of tinkering with, do we just change them completely? Which is, that's a pathway that we could go down. We could just make them more traditionally a heavy weapon and give them a dice pool. We could change the effect on them completely. We could do a lot of things. All of those things require a much more in-depth analysis than saying, cool, what if we just lower them by 5 points? What if we lower them by X number of points? Does that fix the problem? And the reality is that lowering them, it fixes the problem, but in a very bad way. Because all of a sudden the ability to just to force choke across the world, with six of those per round, it's like that's a whole unit that you're just like, you're gone, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it took me 6 activations to do it, but normally is 6 activations like you can't get that guaranteed value out of 6 activations, right? 6 activations statistically should more than easily be able to wipe out a unit depending on some of the situations, but
maybe not if they're dug in. And they have
maybe not if they're dug in, right?
It might take a little more to uproot them.
So now you're getting around, some of that stuff.
Sure.
So I don't know, right? Like, but that's effectively where we're at, is that we very quickly identified that it's not okay to lower their points. So they need a more comprehensive rework. And if that's going to be the case, then we need more time than what we had in this. And maybe that's November, maybe it's April of next year. We're going to always take the time we believe we need. We're not going to do things that we don't believe are in the best health of the holistic game, regardless of what pressures there are, whether it's players really wanting this thing to be better, whether it's, us feeling like we just have to get it solved. We're always going to check ourselves against every time we release an update. If we don't believe that update moves the game forward in a positive fashion, we aren't going to do it. Right? And that is just how it kind of works. It's similar to what we talked about in April when, folks were really expecting a points update and they didn't get one. And we were like, well, I understand the disappointment. The reality is that if we had made a points update in April, it would have been based on very little knowledge about how all of these things affected everything else. We would have had no time between the end of Adepticon, which gave us a lot of really great data to kind of analyze stuff. And we were in the middle of kind of starting the conversations with playtesters and everything that led to this June update.
I like to think you told us this was coming in as many words as you could tell us this was coming without telling us it was coming, right? You went through the exact timelines of, well, if we could have done this, this is what would have happened. But if we do something now, this is the earliest it could happen. And then lo and behold, that date she said is when it happened.
Kind of checks out, right? Like,
Yep.
I know that we live in a cynical we live in a cynical society because we're fed a lot of nonsense. But
Boy, ain't that the
my
truth.
my kind of stance, yeah, like my personal like stance, what I've always tried to aspire to is to be as transparent and honest as possible, and then to always live up to those commitments. So when we say this is our timeline for producing things, like it is what it is. You can believe it or not, but like I think the proof is there if you look at like how these things come out, how these updates happen, how these different things work. And again, the important bit, which I think we didn't announce, but also we didn't want to, is that just because April and November are the times where we're going to come on and talk to people about where we feel like the game is and all of that, that's not necessarily the only time that updates can happen. The point of those is to provide places where community knows we're going to come out and we're going to give you our view on where the game is. That might include adjustments. It might just include hey, these are the things we're watching. Like, we hear you. It's an acknowledgement of the fact that we are engaged in the community discourse, even if we're not participating in the discourse directly. Right. Because I do believe that there's an element again of, oh, they're not saying anything about this thing that we know is a problem, therefore they're ignoring it, or they don't think it's a problem. So we need to discourse louder so that they hear us, right? And those kinds of things become title pools that just suck everything else down.
I'm sorry, just discourse louder has broken me.
Discourse louder, right? Yeah.
I mean,
we do it.
That's not how this. That's why there's this works. That's not how any of this works.
That's why there's a caps
good
button.
Way of putting it. I'm a big fan of that.
Caps buttons are discourse louder. That's what I think. They're just the volume button for discourse. So yeah, that's what they're there for. And then if who knows? Like, we're not.
So just for the listeners there, we had a slight technical hiccup with Discord. So we were just kind of closing out that talking point of the marksman upgrade, and sometimes things need different things. And you were saying about obviously the cadence of those 2 scheduled updates, how that doesn't change the fact that when you originally said that if a game needs fixing, you're going to fix it when it needs fixing, and you're always monitoring it. And those 2 like tent poles in that calendar are more for our benefit to know that we can expect some engagement from you guys.
Yeah, you nailed it. You said it quicker than I did. So there we go.
I mean,
we should
it's
just ask
not my
you
first
the
rodeo.
I know. Look at that. Look at this journalistic summary. You should be like, I got 5 hours of audio. I need to condense it into 3 sentences. Let's go.
I try sometimes. I try. And to be honest, I needed to keep time for this last question, which might be longer. So I find it really interesting. You kind of touched on it talking with us, and it was part of our discussion at UK Games Expo about those kind of faction identities, and we briefly touched on it at Expo, but I kind of wanted to keep that short, so I didn't bring it up then. But the thing that I always want to kind of dig into you guys with is that battle force thing, and we got some subtle changes. Like, I think me and Alan mentioned on the cast that's going to come out tomorrow about like Blizzard Force getting that really feels like it benefits from the bikes, and obviously Imperial March on those Stormtroopers, and then the fun things you can do with Imperial March on the Scouts and Death Troopers for Remnant. And that kind of thing, and kind of how and you mentioned Wookiees specifically earlier in reference to that internal faction balance between rebels and those cross-faction units, how that kind of tails in when you're talking about faction identity and the Imperials feeling pretty close now, Gar feeling pretty close, Rebel, like, where you place battle forces in that kind of overall scheme? Is it? I mean, I suppose that's enough for you to kind of run with there.
Yeah. So battle forces, I think, are really interesting because they're somewhat sub factions of their faction, and I don't think that they necessarily come into consideration for internal faction balance, right? Because we want the freedom for battle forces to just be thematic and cool and fun. And some battle forces are designed off of like the idea of the spectacle, or they're trying to replicate something that we see in the movies or in the media that is very compelling to the hobbyist. And it might have great synergy or story potential with the releases. So like Imperial Remnant's a great one where that is capturing, the moment that we see Moff Gideon's emergence in the Mandalorian season and the idea of the Imperial Remnant, which is introduced in that show. And it all ties around several of the releases that happened at that time. And so it's a really great kind of 1-2 punch of saying, here's some cool new stuff for the game. There's also this incredible narrative way to interact with it and to tell, canonical-ish Star Wars stories on the tabletop. Like if you're really taken by the idea of the Imperial Remnant, here's how you can create it on the table. And I think that's to me, battle forces are always hobbyist kind of first and gameplay second. Which means that, we're not particularly worried about balance being as equal across all of the different battle forces within a faction or all of the factions that have access to battle forces, right? The idea that, Empire might have 5 and Rebels has 2. To us, it's not an inherent balance problem, because if the overall faction balance within the faction itself is good, and we've done our job to make sure that the battle forces are within the balance curve as well, right? That's the only time they're worrisome is if they break something. Yeah. If the battle force becomes the best way to play the faction, I think we have a problem. If it is a strong way to play the faction, but you still can play powerful builds outside of a battle force, then that's fine. So I think there's that element where players can get into the situation where they're like, well, Empire can build their normal armies, they can build, and then they can build 2 battle forces that are really good. So they have more options than we do to build strong lists. And ideally, right, if we're moving the game in the positive direction, that's not true, because you can build infinitely more combinations out of the normal faction builds than you can out of a battle force, which is very restrictive. So yes, you have more options, and some of those might be strong, but ideally they are not the best way to play the faction. The goal is always that if you want the full buffet, you're going to play a normal faction, just to the non-battle force faction. That kind of all tracks into the idea that, we don't worry about internal balance in the same way. So if you have, like when 501st first came out, when the battle forces were first introduced, it was very clearly not a particularly competitive battle force.
Right.
It gave you the opportunity to play in this way. If you liked ARC troopers, you could play a lot of ARC troopers. But that wasn't really the soup du jour of the time. So it was often like decried as like, it's really weak, it's not very good. And it was clearly the worst of the 4 that was released. Blizzard Force was very, very strong, right? Blizzard Force probably was slightly overtuned, and then obviously we had to go back in and make some adjustments to it. Like that one broke the curve. That was too much. Where they kind of ended up, where Blizzard Force was still strong, but it wasn't necessarily outshining the general faction itself. 501st was still fairly weak, was fine to us because you can play Republic in many ways. You don't have to play 501st. And ideally the game should be balanced enough that even if all of your battle forces are not particularly great, it doesn't change the fact that your faction is still balanced against the other factions. You just maybe have a few less hobbyist options. And that's not to say that personally, I don't think that's a problem, right? I think we want battle forces to be compelling and interesting choices. We want them to do things in the game. That's why we're making them. That said, right, like the level at which we're concerned with their ability to compete in a tournament setting versus a casual like game night setting, very different from the normal faction balance, right? Okay. Like if you can put together a 501st list, pilot it fairly well, and have a great time playing with your buddy at the kitchen table or at your LGS's or game club's game night, and you're like, oh, this would never win a tournament, but like I don't feel like I'm playing with both my legs chopped off. And I had fun, and it was really neat to do. And
I
think
always
that's
got to
great.
be attacking my Shadow Collective all the time.
I know.
Why are you got to do more like that? Both his legs.
But
well, I mean,
Shadow
Anakin
Collective
got his legs too.
It's true, legs and
he's in 501st.
He is.
I'm just saying.
But then like Shadow Collective is another interesting one because Shadow Collective is how you play with mercenaries. So its balance is more akin to faction balance, right? Like we know that players who don't want to play the 4 main factions and want to engage with like the mercenary element are their only option is to play Shadow Collective. So its balance has to be more attuned to, well, still very limited, right? It's still a battle force. It's still never going to have all the toys or options that Rebels or Empire or anyone else is that gets the regular faction cadence of releases. It still needs to be able to stand up and compete well against that because a player may make the choice that that's going to be their entry point into the game, and we want them to have a good experience with it. But
not even throwing me the only way to currently play mercenaries. Oh man, big sad.
I know. I know. Well,
you just keep fishing, Chris.
I mean, I'm going to keep fishing. I love it.
Always in motion. The future is, I believe, is the quote. So, So like that's kind of how it all comes down. I think from will we see more battle forces? 100%. They are very fun to do. We love being able to express Star Wars in different ways. From a hobby's perspective, Dallas and I are super chuffed with them because they provide that impetus to be like, oh, I could do this. Oh, I could do that. From the narrative perspective, they let us dive deeper into the Star Wars galaxy and to play again in that world as players and fans and all of that good stuff. And then from the development perspective, they give us opportunities to do really crazy and out there things that allow players to engage with their collections of miniatures in really intriguing ways. Remnant being one of them, like the Wookiee Battle Force, obviously the Defenders of Kashyyyk being one where it's like, well, I just love Wookiees. Okay, great. Here's how you play just the Wookiees.
Yeah.
Right. The Bright Tree Village is another one where, that one has the dual purpose of, well, I want to play Ewoks or I want to play the force that we see at the end of Return of the Jedi. Ewoks and other things may not be able to exist without battle forces because at the end of the day, in order for LFL to be cool with adding things to the game, those things have to be able to be represented in a canonical fashion as well as a player choice faction. So when you say, I want to take Ewoks with my cool rebel army and I'm going to put them with like gear and blaster rifles and everything else because they've been integrated into the rebellion army, as a player, that's your prerogative. That's part of the joy of the game. From our standpoint, right, we're not going to make that unit a real thing and put it in a package and then, market and sell it because that's not Star Wars. And at the end of the day, we are making a Star Wars game that is true to the story of Star Wars and the media and the representations and all that. So Bright Tree Village, getting Ewoks into the game was challenging because if you don't have a way in which to represent that force and say, well, this is how we saw them in the story. Great. Right.
Yeah.
There are many other things in the game. Shadow Collective is kind of one of them, right? How do you bring these mercenaries together? Because the scum and villainy was never a faction, right? They never made a standing army. But Shadow Collective absolutely was able to muster forces together that could compete against an army if it needed to, right? It could get into a big engagement. There's enough knowledge of the setting to say that is a thing that's possible.
I'm up to Siege of Mando on so it's great.
Yeah. Or like the Hutt Syndicate, right? If you think about like I want to play the Hutt Syndicate, they're not running around in starfighters like invading planets, but we have enough information that we can say, okay, here's the Hutt Syndicate, and now you as the player can say, what if the Hutt Syndicate got a starfighter fleet together and started invading planets, and this is how it would look, right? You get to tell those stories yourself. Battle forces are the mechanism that allow us to do that. And I think that's the most important aspect of the battle force system is that it lets us delve into some of the smaller like niches, however you want to say it, of the galaxy that don't necessarily canonically work without the ability to take more smaller pieces of the story and encapsulate them within game rules. And there's so many different things that you can talk about with that. You want to talk about the Night Sisters of Dathomir from the Clone Wars episode where we see that, or the Umbarans, from the Umbaran arc. Take your pick, right? The weird slaver cat people that exists, like if you wanted them in the game, all of those kind of require a battle force because they're not part of the traditional standing armies. We don't see, or there's no like story about them joining the regular forces and going off and being significant parts of the battles that took place in these different wars or conflicts. So how do we maintain the ability to play Star Wars canonically, but also give players that choice to be able to explore and tell the stories they want to tell? And that's always it's the fine line we walk with how we do stuff. Battle forces are a huge key to that. And so they're fun on a lot of different levels, but I think they're also really key to the game's expansion and growth and the places that we get to go play in within the galaxy far, far away.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's
very similarly, like, where do we see, I don't know, Gungans, for example? It would be in a battle.
Oh, interview over.
Episode 1.
Interview over.
Reset the clock.
Reset
the clock. Keep them out. Let's go. Gatekeeping the Gungans. Get out of here.
I did not realize that this was gonna no. Yeah, Gungans are another one, right? Like, I mean, we see them work alongside the Republic Army, both mostly in the Clone Wars, right? Because the Republic Army doesn't actually exist in episode 1. They're more of a militia. And again, that's another one where it's like, they didn't go off world that we're aware of outside of Jar Jar, who went to the Senate and stuff and had adventures.
I'll take a Jar Jar operative. The Republic's missing stuff.
Your typical Gungan warrior, right? He defended
Stayed home.
He fought on Naboo. That was it. So if you want to bring that, that element into Legion, you need a way in which to represent the Gungans canonically. And then as a crazy Republic player who loves the Gungans, you now have the opportunity, just like Rebel players with Ewoks, to be like, yep, we enlisted them and they're fighting alongside Anakin and Ahsoka on Christophsis. Like, whatever the stories you want to tell, you can do that.
Yeah. And I feel like that touched on the balance you were talking about, obviously, of like, I think the best example I can think of would be the Fluttercraft being like probably missing. It's not quite there in Republic. Obviously, you get the special issue Fluttercraft for the Wookiee Battle Force, and how you kind of get held back in any of that design space because of battle forces. Does it kind of go both ways in that regard?
A little bit. I think like the other aspect of battle forces, right, is that it gives us the opportunity. When you make a unit, you have to say, okay, we have to test all of the extremes of that unit's use. So in the whole faction, in the aggregate of everything within a faction, there's a lot of permutations, and there's a lot of things that can push units to be not okay, right? To push them beyond the bounds. So everything is internally balanced against the extremes. But a battle force gives us the opportunity to say, okay, we want to focus on Fluttercraft, right? Like, let's make Fluttercraft compelling, different, more interesting, or whatever. They're going to be a central focus of this limited list. And because the list is limited, as a developer, you have much more control over how the interactions you have to worry about. So like Fluttercraft in the battle force are okay in their push state because they are kind of a linchpin, and there's not as many things. We control what you can take with them. So if ever we were to make something that was like, oh, that's not okay, right? We just don't put it in the battle force. We say, no, there's a limiter, there's a gate. That's untrue of anything that goes into the regular faction. And so, battle forces are kind of intriguing because they also give us the opportunity to do weird things. Like we can make Fluttercraft function differently and try some experimental rules. We can make different units of Magna Guard. We can put Chewie in an ATST, which might be okay if it was in General Rebels, but at the same time, maybe not. Hey, we know it's fine within the level of that battle force, so let's do that, right? Because the options are limited. So a lot of those really unique things that you can do, because you have more control over the variables, than you do at a normal release. And so that's where that kind of stuff comes from. And sometimes the ideas are like, this unit isn't quite hitting the mark, but it's a cool unit. Experimental droids was very much a Magna Guard and Persuaders were not seeing the kind of level of player excitement or attachment in game that we really wanted to see with them. And at the time, it was like, okay, well, what are our options? The most efficient option is to make a battle force that kind of features them as a central pillar and does some cool stuff that's different with them.
I'm back and forth at a minute. I'm trying to hard force a Magna Guard list from experimental. I feel like the Persuader's being played to success now, but I'm kind of spitballing around some experimental Magna Guard ideas and just I
think Strike Team Leader, to go back to our first topic of the day, right? It really opens up a lot of Magna Guard plays that I'm excited to see people like go with. But obviously it doesn't work in experimental because it's a limited upgrade. So you can't take it in there for probably good reason. But so those are other things that we can do with those, right? It's not just what's cool, what can we tack around. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, let's see if we can influence players' options within their collections, right? Let's see if we can do some neat stuff that lets a unit shine in a way that it cannot within its normal faction, right? Because sometimes again, you might not be able to make enough points adjustment to make it really worth it. You might not be able to find a way to rebalance the unit in a way that's going to work within the general faction. Battle forces give you a lot more flexibility to be weird and experimental and to try different things that, again, hopefully bring value to the investment that you've made into your armies, because now you have a new way to play. And it doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be the only way, but it's a new way to play, right? Sometimes it is the only way. Like if you want to play only Wookiees, it's the only way to play. But, ideally you want to do more than that. If you don't, that's cool. But that's why it's a sub faction, right? It's a choice that you're making to be like, I'm going to limit myself to these things, and that's it.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I really appreciate, we both really appreciate you staying on. Obviously, we've massively ran over. So that's,
no worries.
It's great for us. Hopefully it was great for you. Do you have any...
I always have a good time.
Any call to actions? Do you want me to try and get some listener input for your Tale of 4 gamers? Get you some 600-point lists in the comments?
No, I don't want to make that burden other people.
Public poll your color scheme for what color Luke's jacket's going to be.
You know what? If folks want to comment on like color schemes or ideas for paint styles, I'm in for that. Like, you don't have to make me a list. I'll make the list, but if you got some like weird esoteric regiment or something that's like, oh, this was really neat, or just do magenta, like make synthwave rebels. I'm in for all ideas. Like one of them will spark something. So I'm always happy to take crazy ideas for hobby.
Cool. Thank you so much again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Just the excitement's been great to see. Obviously the buzz was immediate, and like the upgrades coming out like before Q2 or Q1 next year, and like giving us just a little taste as a treat to get those extra toys on the table is really fun. And I'm excited to get more fluttery craft in. I know Alan, again, you already heard him talk about how excited he is. So.
Empire, I'm so excited. Empire's coming back, baby.
Looking forward to all of it. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And of course, all the great content and community building you guys do. Like everyone in the studio, absolutely. Like, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to come on and see you all like be as passionate as you are about all the stuff that we try to tinker on and make fun. So thanks for all that.
Yeah.
Keep it up. You're doing great.
Yeah. I've got nothing but praise for what you guys are doing. It's been so great to kind of see, and just wanted to take that time to like honestly express how appreciative we all are. I know that it takes time to kind of get this buy and rebuild the game for what you want it to be now, and I'm so excited for these starter sets and those new people because I want to see what a queen brain does that isn't all polluted from all of my carryover, so that I can then steal her idea. No, but yeah, it's so
It'll be
much
a
fun.
wild
I
time
think,
for sure.
yeah, the future is very exciting, and the present is equally so now. Now's the time to be playing Legion. I'm very hyped.
Well, that was if that's the way everyone feels, then mission accomplished, because that was definitely our hope for surprising everyone last Monday. So
yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for getting home from work early, Alan, so we could do it. And yeah, I'll probably not edit this immediately. I'll probably go to bed and do it tomorrow.
Sounds like a plan.
There we go.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you all next time.
Cheers.